My husband and his secretary, who was also his secret mistress, fired me the moment they took over the company. "We don't need lazy people like you," they said. I smiled politely and left. The next day their father asked, "Why the hell did you fire her?" When they saw the contract they were shocked by what they saw. Because the contract was, "We don't need lazy people like you," my husband said, his voice so cold I barely recognized it. Beside him, Jessica, his secretary and apparently much more, smirked with unconcealed satisfaction. The boardroom fell silent as every executive averted their eyes, suddenly fascinated by their notepads or the conference table's polished surface. I'd known this moment was coming. 3 weeks earlier I had forgotten my phone charger at the office and returned after hours to retrieve it. The main floor was deserted, but a sliver of light escaped from under Elliot's door. I approached quietly, not wanting to interrupt if he was on a call. "She has no idea," I heard Jessica whisper, her voice intimate in a way that made my stomach clench. "Once your father signs over control, we can finally stop pretending." Elliot's laugh, low and conspiratorial, was one I'd never heard before. "Dad's health scare was the push we needed. The succession plan is already in motion." I froze, hand suspended mid-knock. Through the crack in the door I saw them. Jessica perched on my husband's desk, her skirt hiked indecently high, her fingers tracing patterns on Elliot's chest as he stood between her legs. "And Sienna?" Jessica asked, pronouncing my name like it left a bad taste in her mouth. "She's served her purpose," Elliot replied. "Dad always had a soft spot for her, but he's not thinking clearly these days. Once I'm in charge, we'll phase her out. She's been coasting for years anyway." Something broke inside me that night. Trust, love, the illusion of a 15-year marriage. But something else hardened in its place. I slipped away unnoticed, leaving my phone charger behind, and drove home in a daze. When Elliot returned hours later, I pretended to be asleep, buying myself time to think. Anthony's heart attack 6 months ago had changed everything. Though mild, it had rattled everyone, especially his son. Anthony Hamilton had built Hamilton Innovations from nothing, turning it into a respected mid-sized tech company. I'd watched the strain it put on him over the years, the toll of leadership visible in the deepening lines around his eyes. But I'd also seen his pride when the company hit milestone after milestone. Elliot had always worked at his father's company, groomed from college to eventually take over. I'd met him during my first week as a project manager. He was charming, ambitious, and seemed genuinely interested in my ideas. Our whirlwind romance culminated in marriage within a year. Anthony had welcomed me warmly, both as a daughter-in-law and as an employee with fresh perspectives. What no one at Hamilton Innovations knew, except Anthony, was that I wasn't just Elliot's wife or a mid-level employee. I was the silent partner who had provided the initial capital that saved the company during its rocky early years. My inheritance from my grandparents had been substantial, and I'd believed in Anthony's vision enough to invest everything. We'd kept my involvement quiet at first for practical reasons, then maintained the secret as a strategic advantage. It allowed me to observe the company culture unfiltered, to see how employees were truly treated when they thought no one important was watching. After Anthony's health scare, I noticed subtle changes in Elliot. His affection toward me cooled. Our conversations about work became vague and dismissive. He started coming home later, smelling of unfamiliar perfume, making thin excuses about client dinners and emergency meetings. I'd suspected an affair but had been too afraid to confirm it, until that night at the office. The following weeks brought a flurry of secretive meetings Elliot didn't invite me to. Anthony called less frequently, sounding strained when we did speak. The company grapevine hummed with rumors of reorganization. I watched it all unfold with a strange detachment, like observing a play where I already knew the tragic ending. Which brought me to today's board meeting, the culmination of betrayal that had been building for months. "Sienna, your position is being eliminated as part of our restructuring," Elliot continued, shuffling papers without meeting my eyes. "The severance package is generous, considering your contributions." Jessica slid a folder across the table, her red nails tapping impatiently as I made no move to take it. "It's all standard procedure," she added with false sympathy. "We're streamlining operations now that Elliot has assumed full control from his father." "Where is Anthony?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "Dad's resting at home. Doctor's orders," Elliot replied quickly. He's signed over operational control but remains chairman emeritus. He trusts my vision for the company's future. I doubted that very much. Anthony and I had spoken just last week about Elliot's recent decisions. The corners cut on quality control, the loyal employees replaced with his college friends, the risky ventures undertaken without proper due diligence. Anthony had been troubled, conflicted between paternal pride and business sense. I see, I said, finally reaching for the folder. I opened it, scanned the first page and closed it again. Is that all? Elliot blinked, clearly thrown by my calm. He'd expected tears, perhaps a scene. Jessica looked equally confused, her triumph dimming in the face of my composed demeanor. You have until the end of the day to clear out your office, she said, attempting to reassert control. Security will escort you. I stood, smoothing my skirt. That won't be necessary. I can find my way out of the building I've worked in for 15 years. As I gathered my belongings, I felt the board's collective discomfort. These were people I'd worked alongside for years. Some friends, some merely acquaintances. None spoke up. One question, I said, pausing at the door. Does Anthony know about this meeting? A flicker of unease crossed Elliot's face. As I said, Dad stepped back from day-to-day operations. I'm handling things now. I nodded slowly. Congratulations on your promotion, Elliot. You too, Jessica. I imagine your new position comes with substantial benefits. Jessica flushed, but Elliot's jaw tightened in anger. He recognized the double meaning in my words. I walked out with dignity, past the curious stares of colleagues, past the office I'd occupied for over a decade. My calm exterior betrayed nothing of the calculations running through my mind. They thought they'd seen the last of me, a dismissed employee, a soon-to-be ex-wife, a footnote in the company history. They had no idea what tomorrow would bring. I walked to my car in the company parking lot, my box of personal items lighter than 15 years of memories should be. The security guard, Jim, who'd watched my back on countless late nights, gave me a sympathetic nod. He knew better than to offer the escort Jessica had ordered. As I drove away from Hamilton Innovations, my mind drifted back to where it all began. The Chicago Business Innovation Conference 16 years ago. I was fresh out of my MBA program, hungry to make my mark, still mourning my grandparents' passing while trying to figure out what to do with the substantial inheritance they'd left me. Anthony Hamilton stood out immediately, not because he was the loudest or flashiest presenter but because of his quiet passion. While other entrepreneurs showcased half-baked apps and questionable social media platforms, Anthony had actual prototypes for energy-efficient building systems. His booth was modest compared to the venture capital darlings, but his eyes lit up when explaining the technology. The problem, he told me after I'd lingered at his display long enough to ask detailed questions, isn't the technology. It's the capital. Banks see us as too risky and venture capitalists want controlling interest. We ended up talking for hours at the hotel bar afterward, sketching possibilities on cocktail napkins. Anthony had 20 years of engineering experience, a small but dedicated team, and a warehouse full of promising prototypes. What he didn't have was runway. My son just graduated business school, he mentioned, pride evident in his voice. Elliot has fresh ideas about marketing, distribution channels I hadn't considered. I remember thinking how rare it was, a father and son wanting to build something meaningful together. It resonated with me. I'd been close to my grandfather who always regretted not having the capital to expand his small hardware store. What if I invested? I asked impulsively after my third iced tea. My grandparents left me their life savings. It's just sitting in accounts while I figure out what to do with my life. Anthony had laughed, thinking I was joking. When he realized I wasn't, his expression grew serious. That's not something to offer lightly, Sienna. But it wasn't a light offer. We met again the next day and the next. He showed me business plans, market research, patent applications. By the end of the week I was convinced. $500,000, I said in his hotel room on the final day of the conference. For 49% of the company. Anthony nearly choked on his coffee. That's too generous. And frankly too risky for you. I shook my head. I've read every page of your business plan. I believe in what you're building. But I want 51%. His face fell. I can't give up controlling interest, Sienna. This company is my life's work. I don't want control day to day, I clarified. I want protection. I've seen too many investors get pushed out once companies become successful. We'll draft an agreement. You run the company as you see fit, but major decisions require my approval. And I want a position inside the company, something that lets me understand the business from the ground up. Anthony studied me for a long moment. You're unlike any investor I've met. Most want quarterly reports and hands-off returns. I'm not most investors, I replied. I want to learn to build something meaningful. But I also want security. We shook hands that day, beginning a partnership that would transform both our lives. I called my cousin Melissa, a ruthless corporate attorney, to draft our agreement. She thought I was crazy to invest my entire inheritance, but she made sure the contract was ironclad. This clause, she pointed out during our third revision, ensures that if anyone attempts to remove you from the company without cause, your ownership stake automatically converts to 70% of voting shares. That seems extreme, I said, surprised by her hardline approach. Melissa fixed me with her stern lawyer gaze. Family businesses get complicated, Sienna. Especially when there's a son involved who hasn't earned what his father built. Trust me on this. I signed the papers, transferred the funds, and moved to join Hamilton Innovations as a project manager. Anthony introduced me to Elliot at the company Christmas party that year. The attraction was immediate and mutual. When Anthony saw the spark between us, he took me aside. This complicates things, he said, nursing a whiskey. If you and Elliot become involved, we should keep your investor status quiet. Not forever, but until we're sure. I agreed. Our relationship was separate from business, and I wanted to earn respect through my work, not my financial stake. As Elliot and I grew closer, the secret became our norm. Only Anthony, Melissa, and the company's accountant knew the truth. Years passed. The company flourished. Elliot and I married. I rose through middle management on my own merit, careful never to use my hidden influence. Anthony became not just a business partner but a true friend, often confiding in me about company matters he wouldn't discuss with others. About 3 years ago, those conversations took a troubling turn. Elliot wants to cut corners on the new product line, Anthony confessed during one of our monthly dinners. Says we could save 15% on manufacturing costs by switching suppliers. The Korean manufacturer? I asked, familiar with the proposal. Their quality control has been questioned industry-wide. Anthony nodded, lines deepening around his eyes. I've built this company on reliability. One recall could destroy our reputation. It wasn't just business decisions. Anthony worried about Elliot's character, his treatment of employees, his focus on appearances over substance. And increasingly he worried about Jessica. She's ambitious, Anthony said carefully after her promotion to executive assistant. Nothing wrong with ambition, but what? I prompted. She reminds me of my ex-wife, he admitted. Always looking for advantage, for status. I see how she looks at Elliot. I should have paid more attention to his concerns, but I was busy launching our sustainability division, fighting for resources against Elliot's preference for flashier projects. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, my husband and I began living parallel lives, connected by marriage and the company but growing apart in values. After Anthony's heart attack, during a private moment in the hospital, he squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Remember your contract," he whispered. "Melissa made sure you'd be protected. No matter what happens." At the time, I'd thought he was delirious from medication. Now, driving home from the office with my career and marriage in shambles, his words echoed with prophetic clarity. I pulled into my driveway, drew a deep breath, and made 2 calls. The first to Anthony. The second to Melissa. Tomorrow would be a very different day. I slept surprisingly well that night, waking to my phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. 6 missed calls from Elliot, 3 from Jessica, and 1 text from Anthony. "It's done. Coming to pick you up in 30 minutes. Coffee in hand, I watched through the kitchen window as Anthony's sensible sedan pulled into my driveway exactly on time. He'd always been punctual, a quality Elliot had never inherited. "You look better than expected," Anthony said as I slid into the passenger seat. His color had improved since I'd last seen him, though fatigue lined his face. "Being underestimated has its advantages," I replied. "How did it go?" Anthony's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Worse than I imagined, better than they deserved." He'd gone to the office at 7 a.m., earlier than his usual schedule since his heart attack. Elliot and Jessica were already there, apparently celebrating their coup with champagne in Elliot's newly expanded corner office. My former workspace now incorporated into his domain. I heard the giggling from the hallway, Anthony said, disgust evident in his voice. Didn't even have the decency to close the door properly. When I walked in, Jessica was sitting on my old desk. My desk, Sienna, with her shoes kicked off in her legs. He trailed off, too gentlemanly to continue. I can imagine, I said quietly. Anthony had stood in the doorway, unnoticed for several seconds, before clearing his throat. Having a party without me? He'd asked, his voice deceptively mild. Elliot had nearly fallen out of his chair. Dad, you're supposed to be resting. Clearly, so I wouldn't interfere with your management decisions? Anthony had stepped into the room, closing the door firmly behind him. Like firing my business partner without consulting me? Jessica had scrambled off the desk, smoothing her skirt. Mr. Hamilton, Elliot was simply implementing the restructuring plan you approved. I approved no such thing, Anthony had cut her off. And I certainly never authorized terminating Sienna. It was a necessary business decision, Elliot had insisted, regaining his composure. The severance package was generous. Mom always said you were too soft on her anyway. Anthony described the fury that overtook him then, a rage so intense his vision had actually blurred around the edges. The doctor had warned him about stress, but in that moment he couldn't contain himself. I didn't raise you to be cruel, Elliot, he'd said. Or stupid. Did you even read the contract before you fired her? Elliot had scoffed. What contract? She's middle management. Anthony had reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. The original agreement Melissa had drafted 16 years ago. Sienna isn't just your wife, you fool. She's my business partner. The majority owner of Hamilton Innovations. As Anthony recounted the moment of revelation, a grim smile crossed his face. I wish you could have seen their faces, Sienna. Pure shock. Jessica actually dropped her champagne flute. You're lying, Elliot had spluttered. That's impossible. I would have known. Would you? You've never shown interest in the founding documents. Too busy taking credit for other people's innovations. Anthony had slapped the contract onto the desk. Sienna provided the startup capital when no bank would touch us. Her inheritance funded everything. The equipment, the patents, the first 3 years of operating costs. Without her, there would be no Hamilton Innovations. In the car, I asked, how did Jessica react? Anthony snorted. First shock, then calculation. That woman adapts quickly. She immediately tried to position herself as an innocent bystander. I was just following Elliot's directives, Mr. Hamilton. I had no idea about any of this. But Anthony hadn't been fooled. He'd seen the text messages on Elliot's phone. Jessica had been the one pushing for my termination for months, suggesting replacements for my role, always people connected to her somehow. Then she tried discrediting you, Anthony continued as we pulled into the company parking lot. Said you'd been undermining Elliot, sabotaging projects, sharing company secrets with competitors. That's ridiculous, I said, genuinely surprised. I've given everything to this company. I know that. Told her exactly where she could stick those accusations. Anthony parked in his reserved spot, which someone, likely Jessica, had already relabeled with Elliot's name. He peeled the vinyl lettering off with savage satisfaction. Elliot had apparently moved from denial to anger quickly. You never trusted me to run this company, he'd shouted. You've had her spying on me all these years, reporting back to you. No, son, Anthony had responded, his voice heavy with disappointment. I trusted you would earn the right to lead, not steal it. Sienna never needed to spy, your actions spoke for themselves. The confrontation had escalated until Anthony mentioned the contract's termination clause, the one Melissa had insisted on. Upon wrongful termination, Sienna's ownership stake automatically increased to 70% of voting shares, with Anthony retaining 25%. Elliot, as a minor shareholder, would be left with a mere 5%. He turned white as a sheet, Anthony said, parking the car. Started threatening lawsuits, claiming undue influence. Jessica was already on her phone, probably calling her attorney friend in corporate. Anthony had ended the confrontation by calling an emergency board meeting for 10 a.m., which was 20 minutes from now. The board needs to understand what's happened and why leadership is changing effective immediately. As we walked toward the building, I felt strangely calm. You know they'll fight this. Let them try, Anthony said grimly. Melissa prepared for every contingency. There's even language covering attempted character assassination, which Jessica has already violated. In the lobby, conversations halted as employees noticed us. News traveled fast in an organization this size. Some faces showed confusion, others concern, a few barely concealed satisfaction. I'd always treated the support staff with respect, something Elliot and Jessica considered beneath them. The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent, both of us gathering strength for what was to come. As the doors opened, we were met by Jessica, her composure restored and a fake smile plastered on her face. Mr. Hamilton, Sienna, she said smoothly. The board is assembling now. Elliot asked me to escort you. I know the way to the boardroom I helped pay for, I replied quietly. Jessica's smile faltered. Elliot has prepared a counterproposal that I think you'll find quite reasonable. A graceful exit for all parties. Anthony laughed. A short, harsh sound. The only exits today will be yours and his if you continue this charade. Jessica's eyes narrowed, her mask slipping. Don't be so sure, old man. Things have changed around here. The board respects Elliot's vision, not your outdated management style. As we approached the boardroom doors, we could hear Elliot's voice, urgent and persuasive. He was already working the board members, spinning his version of events. Anthony placed his hand on my shoulder. Ready? I nodded, straightening my spine. I've been ready for 16 years. We pushed open the doors together, stepping into the storm. The boardroom fell silent as we entered. 8 pairs of eyes swiveled toward us. 5 board members, Elliot, Jessica, and Martha from legal, who was frantically flipping through a stack of documents. Elliot stood at the head of the table, my contract projected on the screen behind him, specific clauses highlighted in angry red. Nice of you to join us, he said, his voice tight. I was just explaining to the board how this outdated agreement has been superseded by more recent corporate governance documents. I took a seat directly across from him. Not my usual spot. I'd always sat 3 chairs down, the position of a mid-level manager invited to present, not a key decision maker. The board members' expressions ranged from confusion to awkward discomfort. None of them had known I was anything more than Elliot's wife and a dedicated employee. Martha, I said calmly to the young attorney, you might want to call Melissa Parker at Harrington and West. She drafted the original agreement and all subsequent amendments. She's expecting your call. Martha glanced nervously at Elliot, who gave a curt nod. As she slipped out to make the call, Anthony placed a thick folder on the table. While we're waiting for legal clarification, he said, I believe we should address the reason for this emergency meeting, the improper termination of a founding partner without board approval. What followed was 3 hours of the most intense corporate combat I'd ever witnessed. Melissa joined by conference call, her precise legal explanations dismantling Elliot's arguments one by one. By meeting's end, the board had no choice but to acknowledge my majority ownership and rescind my termination. This isn't over, Elliot hissed as we filed out. Jessica had already disappeared, presumably to clear her desk before security arrived. You're right about that, I replied quietly. That confrontation had been 2 weeks ago. Since then, I'd sequestered myself in my home office, converted years ago from a would-be nursery when we learned we couldn't have children. The walls were now covered with organizational charts, financial reports, and sticky notes detailing irregularities I'd discovered while combing through company records. Being underestimated had its advantages. As just an employee, I'd had access to systems and conversations that revealed the true state of Hamilton innovations. Now, with full executive access granted by the board, I was discovering just how deeply the rot had spread under Elliot's influence. He funneled nearly $800,000 in development funds to his college roommate's startup, I told Anthony during one of our evening strategy sessions. The agreement shows we received exclusive licensing rights, but the technology never materialized. Anthony shook his head, examining the documents I'd spread across my dining room table. Nathan Forsyth always had Elliot convinced he was the next Steve Jobs. How did I miss this? It was buried in the R&D budget as external consultation. And there's more. I passed him another folder. Jessica's brother was hired as a senior sales consultant last year. Salary of $150 plus commission. According to HR records, he hasn't brought in a single account. Night after night, we pieced together a disturbing pattern. Elliot had been systematically replacing experienced staff with friends and connections, creating a network of loyalty built on favors rather than merit. Quality control reports had been altered. Customer complaints buried. Financial projections manipulated to justify bonuses. My phone buzzed constantly with Elliot's messages, evolving from threatening to cajoling to desperate. You're making a mistake. We can fix this. Whatever Dad's paying you to do this, I'll double it. Sienna, please. 15 years of marriage has to count for something. At least meet me for coffee. Hear my side. I let them all go to voicemail, focusing instead on the allies I'd need for what came next. First was Darlene from accounting, who'd been with the company since the beginning. She'd watched her department shrink as Elliot outsourced functions to a firm run by his former classmate. I've been keeping my own records, she confided when I invited her for coffee at a cafe far from the office. She slid a flash drive across the table. Discrepancies between reported expenditures and actual payments. Thought I was just being paranoid until you called. Then came Robert from engineering, passed over for promotion when Elliot brought in Jessica's cousin despite Robert's superior qualifications. The new safety protocols were shelved, he revealed during our discreet meeting. The ones you championed last year. Jessica said they were cost prohibitive, and had Elliot sign off on the minimum legal standards instead. One by one, I connected with employees who'd been sidelined or silenced. Each had a piece of the puzzle, evidence of corners cut and standards compromised. You've built quite the shadow network, Anthony observed one evening, impressed by my methodical approach. I never realized how many people were loyal to you. Not to me, I corrected him. To the company's values. The ones you instilled from the beginning. In our third week of investigation, Anthony brought his own bombshell. Elliot's been meeting with Westlake Industries. I had Greg from legal follow up on a rumor. They're discussing acquisition terms. My blood ran cold. Westlake was our biggest competitor, known for buying companies, stripping their assets and discarding the employees. He can't sell without our approval. He's trying to leverage his position as CEO to force our hand, claiming that without this deal the company will fail. Anthony looked exhausted. Some board members are getting nervous. That night after Anthony left, I sat alone in my home office, staring at the evidence we'd gathered. My phone buzzed with Elliot's 19th call of the day. This time I answered. What do you want? I asked flatly. Dinner. Just dinner, Sienna. His voice held none of its usual arrogance. The Preston Hotel. Private dining room. I'll come alone. I should have refused, but curiosity won out. Tomorrow. 7 o'clock. I'll be bringing someone from legal. Fine. Whatever you need. He paused. Thank you for at least talking to me. I hung up without responding and called Anthony. Elliot wants to meet. It's a trap, he warned immediately. Of course it is, I agreed. But I want to hear what he's offering. It might reveal what he's most afraid of us finding. We spent the rest of the night preparing, anticipating every possible scenario. By dawn, I had outlined our final strategy, the calculated response to Elliot's desperate moves. I showered and dressed carefully, selecting a conservative blue suit I hadn't worn since my termination. In my briefcase, I placed a single folder containing documents that would determine the future of Hamilton Innovations, and the people who had built it. Whatever happened at dinner, Elliot was about to learn that underestimating me had been his most expensive mistake. The Preston Hotel's private dining room was understated elegance, neutral tones, soft lighting, and a table set for 3, though only Elliot waited when I arrived. No sign of Jessica. My attorney, Rebecca Chin, a colleague of Melissa's who specialized in corporate fraud, accompanied me, tablet and recorder ready. Thank you for coming, Elliot said, standing awkwardly. Gone was the commanding presence he'd cultivated over years of playing executive. He looked smaller somehow, his designer suit hanging slightly loose, dark circles shadowing his eyes. You requested this meeting, I reminded him, taking a seat across from him rather than at his side. I'm listening. Rebecca placed her tablet on the table, the recording app visibly running. Elliot glanced at it nervously before pushing a folder toward me. A settlement offer, he said. I keep operational control as CEO. You and Dad retain financial oversight. We bring in an independent auditor agreeable to all parties. We stop the internal investigations, agree to move forward, and protect the company's reputation. I opened the folder, skimmed the document, and closed it again. And Jessica? His expression tightened. Repositioned to external relations. She has valuable connections. No, I interrupted. That's not going to work. Elliot leaned forward, desperation edging into his voice. Sienna, be reasonable. Think about what a public battle will do to the company. To the Hamilton name. I've thought about little else these past weeks, I replied calmly. I opened my briefcase and removed my own folder. This is my counteroffer. He scanned the document, his face paling with each page. You can't be serious. Completely serious. A forensic audit has already begun. The preliminary findings are detailed on page 4. Rebecca tapped her tablet. The audit team has identified $2.3 million in misappropriated funds. The document outlines the terms under which Hamilton Innovations will not pursue criminal charges. Elliot's hands trembled as he set down the papers. This would destroy me. You did that yourself, I said quietly. I'm offering you a way to leave with your freedom and enough to start over. More than you offered me. Our meals arrived, untouched as Elliot battled with the inevitable. Finally he asked, what about us? 15 years, Sienna. For a moment I felt a flicker of the connection we'd once shared, ambitious young professionals building something together. Then I remembered Jessica's smirk as I was dismissed from the boardroom. Sign the agreement, Elliot. Or we can continue this conversation with the FBI present. 3 days later I walked through Hamilton Innovations' front doors as acting CEO. The press release had gone out that morning. Elliot Hamilton stepping down for personal reasons, Sienna Hamilton assuming leadership during the transition, Anthony Hamilton returning as chairman of the board. The receptionist's eyes widened as I approached. Miss Hamilton. Welcome back. Thank you, Diane, I said warmly. How's your son doing at college? Her surprise at being remembered melted into a genuine smile. Made Dean's List first semester. That scholarship program you started made all the difference. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt different this time. Employees nodded respectfully, some offering quiet congratulations. The whispers that followed were curious rather than pitying. Anthony waited in the CEO's office. Elliot's office until yesterday, now mine. The space had already been transformed. Gone were the pretentious modern art pieces Elliot had insisted projected success. The desk had been repositioned to face the door rather than the view, making it about work rather than status. The team worked through the night, Anthony explained. Said they wanted it ready for your first day. I noticed familiar touches. My old plants rescued from storage, family photos I'd kept in my middle management office, the worn leather chair I'd always found more comfortable than Elliot's ergonomic throne. First order of business, I said, settling behind the desk. The department heads are waiting in the conference room. The meeting that followed set the tone for the new Hamilton Innovations. The forensic audit's findings were presented transparently. $2.7 million in misappropriated funds, systematic nepotism, and dangerous corner-cutting in quality control. No attempt to hide or minimize the damage. We're going to fix this, I told the shocked executives. Together. Starting with a restructuring that rewards merit, not connections. Robert from engineering was promoted to Chief Technology Officer, replacing Elliot's fraternity brother who'd missed 6 critical deadlines. Darlene became Chief Financial Officer, her decades of institutional knowledge finally recognized. Throughout the organization, talented employees who'd been overlooked were elevated to positions where they could make real contributions. By week's end, the transformation was palpable. Energy had returned to the offices. Ideas flowed freely in meetings where people had previously kept silent, afraid of contradicting Elliot or Jessica's favorites. I've never seen morale rebound so quickly, Anthony commented as we reviewed the week's progress. The board is impressed. Even the skeptics are coming around. People want to do good work, I replied. They just need the right environment. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. I was working late, reviewing production schedules when my office door burst open. Jessica stood there, mascara streaked down her face, clutching a designer handbag like a shield. "You got what you wanted," she spat. "Elliot's leaving the country. Says he can't face the humiliation." I set down my pen. "That's his choice. The agreement only required his resignation. You destroyed him. After everything he did for this company." "What exactly did he do, Jessica? Besides taking credit for other people's work and funneling money to friends?" She faltered, anger momentarily replaced by uncertainty. "He had vision." "No," I corrected gently. "He had ambition. There's a difference." Jessica sank into a chair, suddenly deflated. "What happens to me now?" "That depends. The forensic audit shows you received $176,000 in improper bonuses and authorized hiring 3 family members for non-existent positions. You can repay the money and resign, or we can proceed legally." Her facade crumbled entirely. "I can't repay that kind of money. It's gone." "Then you have a difficult road ahead." I handed her a card. "This attorney specializes in financial restitution cases. She can help structure a repayment plan that might keep you out of jail." After she left, Anthony appeared in the doorway. "You heard." I nodded. Security called when she arrived. He entered, closing the door behind him. "You could have had her arrested." "To what end?" "She's lost everything that mattered to her. Status, power, Elliot." I shrugged. "Some lessons have to be learned the hard way." Anthony studied me with newfound respect. "When did you become so wise?" "Somewhere between being fired by my husband and discovering I owned the company," I replied with a small smile. As we looked out over the city lights, Anthony placed a hand on my shoulder. "You know, I always hoped Elliot would grow into the kind of leader this company deserved. Turns out she was here all along." The Hamilton innovations that emerged from the scandal was stronger, more ethical, and more innovative than before. The projects I'd championed for years, sustainable materials, employee development programs, ethical manufacturing, became our new priorities. Sometimes, late at night in my office, I found myself wondering about Elliot and the life we'd planned together. But those moments grew rarer as Hamilton innovations flourished under new leadership. Some called it revenge. I preferred to think of it as restoration, of values, of purpose, of potential. The company hadn't just survived betrayal, it had been transformed by it. And so had I.